December 10, 2000. Jim Willett, the prison warden at Huntsville, Texas, has been on his feet since 5 in the morning. He paces the living room, which was decorated by his wife for Christmas. Then he glances over at the clock. Willett is glad he was able to catch some sleep. He is a 50-year-old man who has been working at the prison for almost 30 years now, interacting with the most dangerous criminals without a second thought. Yet he somehow still can't get fully used to his duties. He feels anxious and even tries to make up some reason not to go to work. After all, this Tuesday, the next execution of the criminal is set to take place at the prison, and he, as always, will be leading it. During his 2.5 years as prison warden, Willett has carried out 84 executions. The working day begins with a long-standing ritual of sorts. He arrives at his office and looks at the photos of his kids, preparing himself for what's to come. Because of the tall red brick walls, his prison has been nicknamed the Walls Unit. Its primary difference from other such institutions is that there are no prisoners here. Criminals are only brought here on the day of their execution. When, for the first time in Huntsville, they brought a woman, Willett was extremely distressed at first, but then he realized that there is no difference between the criminals. It has always been difficult to carry out the death sentence every single time. On the surface, Willett's job seems rather simple. He must stand at the head of the gurney to which the criminal is tied. After ensuring everything is ready, he gives a signal to the anonymous and invisible executioner in the next room, which activates the introduction of a lethal injection into the condemned person's vein. The criminals never even suspect the exact moment when the execution begins, since Willett's signal always appears natural and imperceptible. He simply removes his glasses. And every single time, he finds it difficult to reach up and grab the frame of his glasses, knowing that this very movement will kill a person. Today, it is Gary Miller, a former bartender convicted of the rape and murder of a little girl. It would appear that the offender is not going to cause any trouble. He did not appeal the death sentence and stated through his lawyers that he was ready to die. The prisoner will be brought in around noontime. Until then, Willett checks up on the employees, remembering how it had all began. Back then, the popular electric chair was still used in Texas, but over time it gained the reputation of being too inhumane and too painful to be used for executions. In 1964, the death penalty was banned, and in 1971, Willett went to work as a jailer. While in college, he counted every penny. When he saw a vacancy for a warden at the prison, he promptly agreed to the part-time job. He was then issued a rifle and a uniform. The death penalty was reinstated shortly thereafter, although since then, lethal injections have been used for this instead. Willett moved up the ladder quickly. Yesterday's student was now the boss and even worked for some time at other correctional facilities. In 1998, he returned to Huntsville and found that his job as the warden was to lead executions. Although Texas has the highest number of death sentences, Willett is not exactly used to having to execute people at least once a week. Still, he convinces himself that he is doing everything right because his clients, per se, are cruel criminals who murdered innocent people with ease. Noon has now arrived and a van drives up to the gate, from where the guards take Miller, a large man wearing glasses and bound in shackles. The warden personally goes to meet the perpetrator and escorts him to a 9 by 12-foot cell with turquoise walls. They talk for about 20 minutes, during which Willett prepares the condemned man for the inevitable, describing in detail how the rest of the day will pass. After that, Willett asks the criminal if he was going to make any last statement and what he would like for a special dinner, which is usually served 2 hours before the execution. Most of the convicts tend to order whatever they like to eat outside, maybe a hamburger with fries and a glass of Coca-Cola, for example. Some try to order something more exotic, like a lobster, but Willett has to turn these down, since it is impossible to get such an item in a short amount of time in their small town. Willett also wonders why those who've been sentenced try to eat so much before execution, and catches himself thinking that if it were he in their place, he wouldn't eat anything at all. As if he'd read his mind, Miller refuses the last meal. Alcohol and drugs, especially, are prohibited in prison, so prisoners know that they will meet their death with a clear head. However, in 1996, when the smoking ban was introduced in Huntsville, Willett would occasionally go to the store to get cigarettes for criminals, if someone wanted to smoke before being executed. When the time came for his last wish, Miller, like most who are sentenced, asked to call his relatives. Then a priest was sent to his cell for confession. Meanwhile, Willett issues final instructions to his assistants and goes back to his office. He sits motionless in his chair looking at the phone. At exactly 1800 hours, a call comes in. Either the state governor or the attorney general is giving the final permission to carry out the execution. Some shouts are heard from the street. Jim Willett goes to the window and sees a handful of people with placards. On execution days, they come right under the walls of the prison and protest. Willett realizes once again that the prosecutors who demanded the execution, the jury who voted for it, the judges supporting this decision, and the government officials signing the executive order are not actually killing the person. This incredibly difficult task falls on Willett and his staff, who are the actual executioners. Sighing aloud, Willett calls for the guard and the priest. Together, they walk down the corridor to the cell, where Miller is sitting, having probably heard the approaching footsteps. The lock clangs, and the door opens with a rattle. The men enter the cell, and Willett states that it's time for the execution. Oftentimes, it is at this moment that the offender tries in any and every way to delay the inevitable. He might refuse to follow instructions or clings to the bars of the cell with his fingers. Everyone understands that this person is simply on edge and therefore has sympathy, trying not to hurt the person. After a few minutes, the criminal resigns himself to his fate and calmly leaves the cell, or else he is pulled out of there by force. But today, Miller calmly gets up from the bunk. The killer is taken to the execution chamber, a room with a special table. The execution chamber is only about 30 feet away from the cell and is the last journey taken in the life of the criminal. It is simply referred to as the walk. Miller lies down on the table. He is covered with a sheet, and his arms and legs are locked in with strong leather straps. At the criminal's request, a Bible is put on his chest. Willett recalls how one condemned person, a young man with a large build, had once attacked the doctor just before lying on the table. Fortunately, the guards arrived quickly and calmed him down. Remembering this, the warden thanks God once again that today his client is behaving well. Doctor inserts catheters into Miller's wrists. After a while, an anesthetic and 2 more chemicals for preparation will be injected into the man's vein, which will bring about the convict's death. While the doctor and the guard are preparing the criminal, Willett distracts him with conversations. The doctor tries to make the preparation take up to no more than 30 seconds. It's necessary to work quickly and without any mistakes, so as to not intensify an already tense situation. People watch the procedure through a mirrored window. These are the relatives of Miller's victims, his lawyer, and also a journalist from a local newspaper. Sometimes, per the criminal's wishes, his relatives also come to the execution. Willett will always remember for the rest of his life how one day a murderer's mother had come to the execution. The man could not find the strength to look her in the eyes. Finally, the doctor and the guard go over to another room, where the executioner awaits. Now, only Willett and the priest remain at the table with the condemned. The warden asks if the criminal would like to make a final statement. Typically, the condemned person will turn to the relatives of the victims, ask for their forgiveness, and repent of their deeds, and in some cases will continue to assure everyone of their innocence. At this moment, Miller raises his head and looks over in the direction of where the mother of the girl he killed is sitting behind the glass. They knew each other before the crime. Miller speaks slowly into a microphone fixed above his head, saying he is very sorry. Then he says a short prayer and nods when Willett asks if he's ready. The head of the prison takes off his glasses, and anesthesia flows into the vein of the criminal. The convict slowly falls asleep as the executioner injects him with a lethal mixture of drugs that stop the heart and paralyze the lungs. The execution takes no more than 5 minutes. Willett stands at the head of the bed and waits. He has long noticed the invariable sign that everything is over. Just before death, the condemned man always takes a deep breath, yet never exhales. After that, a doctor enters the cell and officially declares the death. The guards then escort the witnesses of the execution out, and the funeral team comes into the room, heading over to the convict. The body is transported over to the morgue, then to the prison cemetery and promptly buried. A plaque is then placed on the grave with the criminal's serial number and with a black cross, indicating that the deceased was executed. Willett shudders, always recalling the first execution that happened under his leadership. That offender had not resisted at all and had calmly left his cell. He was quickly strapped onto the table, but the doctor could not find his vein. The convict got nervous. Finally, the catheter was inserted, but as soon as the anesthetic was injected, the needle popped back out. Willett ordered the curtain to be closed off from the witnesses in order to prepare everything again. The execution was successfully done, but after returning home, Willett was out of sorts. He then began to keep a diary where he described each execution, as well as his thoughts and feelings, after which he usually went into the living room and talked with his wife or watched some kind of show on TV. Going home, Willett walks past the prison museum, where unique exhibits are collected and put on display. There is, for example, the electric chair, unusual instruments of crime, as well as the handicrafts of the condemned. For children under 4 years old, admission is free, but who would likely come to such a place with a child? Willett has never received threats from relatives of those executed. It is not surprising because, formally speaking, the warden is not an executioner, but he still leaves the prison gates with caution every time. As always, he will talk to his wife, make an entry in his diary, talk to the children, then start to wind down. After years of work at the prison, he is convinced that without his family, he would not have coped well with this burden. Before going to bed, Jim Willett thinks about the fact that many crimes are committed under the influence of alcohol and drugs. During the years that the offender spends behind bars awaiting execution, his mind may become clear, and by the time the sentence is executed, he has actually become a different person. But the decision regarding his punishment has already been made and must be carried out, and someone must do this. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more content like today's.